If we can't figure out ways of addressing horse and human welfare within the equestrian world, then we really don't deserve to have the sport. I think we truly believe that, and I mean, I love eventing, and boy, I mean, I live for it, but I live for the horses more. And
Matt, Cecily Brown is the Facebook page of husband and wife team Matt Brown, who's a 5-star event rider, and Cecily Clark, an FEI dressage rider, and together they run East-West Training Stables in Pennsylvania in the US. In December last year, they posted an open letter to the equestrian world, and I guess you could say it took off. When I looked at the post for our interview, it had nearly 2,000 reactions, 300 comments, and about 700 shares. I think most people would be happy with that level of engagement. And if you haven't read the letter, we strongly encourage you to have a read, and there's a link in our show notes. Matt and Cecily, thank you so much for joining us on Changing Rein today.
well, thanks for having us. This is a great opportunity to talk with you guys.
Yeah, so you published the open letter in December, and it clearly struck a nerve. What made you decide that this was the moment to speak up, and what has the response been, both publicly and behind closed doors?
As far as it being the moment to speak up, I think that we have struggled with balancing my high performance goals and our horsemanship goals, because the pressures are obvious in the high performance world, but also just in the equine industry in general. One thing that has changed for us over the last 10 years or so is that we have our own property now where we run our business. And so our business is a little bit more stable, which has honestly been a big reason why we feel a little bit more comfortable, where we can speak our truth a little bit more openly because the business is a little more established. And if we are to lose a little business, we're still going to be okay.
No, I probably the same question. What did you hope would happen once you put it out there? What was going to be, when you woke up the following morning, what did you hope to see?
That it wasn't going to be a hugely negative impact and comments. I think that our progression, both personally and professionally, both of us came from very kind of traditional English backgrounds, me in eventing, Cecily in hunters and jumpers. But we both came to natural horsemanship pretty early on in our careers because we were pretty unhappy with how we were being taught to approach the horses in that kind of traditional dominance-based approach. But then we started to get more into the high-performance stuff. I got some sponsors that helped us purchase some horses that got me on the team radar, and that's how I ended up, being an alternate for the Olympics and getting on the Nations Cup teams and all of that. And during that process, not that we lost our horsemanship point of view, but slowly you just start making decisions based on the goals that you have set for yourself. And I personally realized that even though I was an alternate for the Olympics, probably that moment was like the lowest I've ever felt in my career. You'd think that I'm so close to meeting this crazy goal that I would feel fulfilled, and it was actually kind of the opposite of that, because I think we were sacrificing a little bit our personal values. And so kind of coming to that realization made us we had to ask ourselves what we wanted success to look like. And I still want to be on teams, I still want to compete at the highest level, but not if that means sacrificing our own health and the health of the horses. And kind of us both coming to that realization, like, that's what's important to us, and seeing how many people struggle, not only in the business, but also in the high performance arena, to hold their own standards and hold their own values. You kind of get sucked into the high performance machine. And we just want to be able to put it out there in the world that, like, you can take your time. You can value the horses, you can value your own mental health, and you can still do it. And so I think that's where we started to be a little bit more comfortable kind of putting that idea out there. And we want to share that experience so that people understand that it doesn't have to be the way that it normally ends up being.
Well, and I think we wrote the letter in response to the narrative that has sort of been built around a lot of these controversies, is that it ends up being very much based on the individual. This person did that. This person is bad. And we can all kind of feel a little bit exonerated because, oh, it's that person, it's not us. And I think what Matt and I have really started to come to the conclusion about is that it really isn't just the individuals, that it's the culture that we've built around competition. It's the things that we have just grown to accept in the horse world. And I think the letter was sort of in reaction to a lot of that, where people say, oh, well, this is how we've always done it, right? And trying to just sort of point that out of, this is how we've always done it, but that doesn't make it right. And maybe we need to look at the larger culture and not stay the same. And so I think that was really our hope when thinking about reactions, is just maybe we can, like you talked about with your podcast, sort of being this big tent. Everybody's not going to agree with us, but if we can just start putting these ideas out there, and a lot of it is really, like, we definitely don't have all the answers. A lot of what we put out is us trying to figure out those answers and struggling with, like, what actually is the problem? How do we fix it? Can we fix it? And I think instead of trying to put a finished product out there, just saying, like, hey, everyone. And I think the beauty of social is that you have access to a really big community. And so I think being able to say, like, hey, everybody, we're struggling with this idea, what's going on, like, this is how we're muddling our way through it. Let's have a larger conversation and hope that it can stay respectful. But I think that for us, the idea of conversation and welcoming different points of view and putting points of view out there that aren't necessarily super popular, and how can we all sort of muddle through this together. So that was ultimately our hope, not to have people just say, oh, I agree with you, or you're stupid, but to start having that conversation.
The thing that I notice and that I'm a little bit disappointed by is the professional response. We heard from very few professionals in the industry. They were mainly amateur riders or just other people within the industry that aren't even necessarily competitors. And the professionals that we did hear from, it was more about defending the way we do things and not really having as much of an openness to the discussion. Was my experience.
And overall, the reaction was quite positive. I'd say most of the negative comments were like, too long, didn't read, like grammatical complaints. But many people reached out with, sort of stories of their own journey, and feeling really heartened and encouraged that there were other people out there having, a similar kind of crisis of faith. what we got from a lot of people was feeling like, I thought I was the only one going through this, like I felt really alone. And so I think that having people reach out and say, wow, I'm so glad you're out there, just that someone else is having this experience, having this feeling, having these questions, and it made them feel like they shouldn't quit, that they're that there's hope. So I think that was really nice and encouraging for us. And
yeah, one of the things you talk about in the letter is you describe change sort of trickling in slowly. So you talk about the bitter aftertaste of a ride, regret over injecting instead of resting, or looking back at some videos and how you might have used the whip. Can you talk about what that felt like in those specific moments? And was there one that really hit hard, that really got you moving along this journey?
Yeah. I think for me, the one that stands out the most was my second ride at the 5-star level with my horse Super Socks. And it was, I think that it was in preparation for the Olympics, and we were kind of on the team radar. And I was wanting to do everything I could. And so just watching that video back, where there was any ditch or down bank into water, I was going to the stick, in my opinion, too often. It was within, how I was using it was within the rules. So the rule currently is no more than 2 times per use. And so I never hit my horse more than that. And I use a padded crop and all of that. So I know that I wasn't like hurting him. But that being said, I also wasn't trusting the relationship. And the reason why I was using the crop really had nothing to do with how the horse was or wasn't performing. It was me wanting to do everything I could possibly could to make sure that we got around clean inside the time. And so to me, it was more about me not trusting the relationship and not giving my horse the trust that he deserved. And so that kind of pressure and me not honoring the horse the way that I should have felt really not great. And I think it just brought up the fact that in horse sports we really walk this very fine line. And part of why I was riding like that was because that's how I was being coached. Like, you need to buckle down and do everything that you can, no matter what. And sometimes that is, you're coached that way sometimes behind the scenes, and not coached that way when you're in front of the camera or at the competition, because there is an awareness that it's only acceptable to put so much pressure on on a horse. But I find that's not the case in most training situations, especially at a high performance level, at least in my experience. I'm sure there are very ethical high performance riders and trainers out there, and I know that there are. So that moment to me was one that kind of stood out the most. But I would say on a daily basis that the benefit of this being a team between Cecily and I is that we can kind of catch each other. And so if I'm having a rough day and I start to overdo it a little bit too much with a horse, Cecily will stop me and be like, I don't think this is being very productive right now, you need to stop. Sometimes I don't take that very well, but I've gotten better at like accepting that. And so we can use each other a little bit as a insurance.
Well, I think for me, it's been more of a slow trickle, not necessarily one thing that made me go, oh man, we've got to change, or this is bad, or I don't like what I'm seeing. I think definitely in California we were in a bubble and hadn't been exposed to sort of the national high performance scene, and we were just starting to get exposed to the high performance scene, And so as we got more into that, there were definitely things that really opened my eyes, and things that I saw or learned that just made me sad and made me feel less excited about high performance. And it's been interesting watching the Winter Olympics right now, because I've found that I don't have that much interest in watching it, because now that I've had a little bit more of an inside look, I'm like, oh man, what are the things that nobody knows, only the insiders know about all of these competitors, and it's lost its sort of magical pure wonder for me a little bit. And so I think ultimately for me it's been that slow trickle of seeing and being exposed to some really bad things, but then seeing on a day-to-day basis at the horse shows, the small ones, not necessarily the big ones, seeing the horse getting in trouble for not standing still at the mounting block, or having a stud chain on it and at the wash stall and it's not standing still and it's just getting its face ripped off. Those are more of the things that stay with me and make me feel really sad. And for the last few years, more and more, I don't love going to horse shows, because it's the day-to-day just lack of sensitivity for the horses and the experiences that they're going through, and all the mixed messages that they're being sent, and then the way that they're reacting to us and their handling, which is so understandable, but they get in trouble for it all the time. And I start to just go, what are we doing? When I joke to Matt sometimes, I'm like, I'm gonna turn into the person that's like, horses should just be barefoot living in a field and like never have to do anything, because to me it's this day-to-day misunderstanding of the horses in our care that has really gotten to me, and that I would really like to see change.
Karen and I both give talks and presentations, and when you're talking about horse welfare, one of the words you're supposed to use is sentience. And I struggle with it, because it's not a word we use in day-to-day chat, but in your letter you use the word soul. And I thought that is exactly what it is. That really, really resonated with me. Horses have souls, and we're not honouring those souls. We're not recognising those souls in those horses wearing the stud chain, or all the stuff that we do. We're just ignoring the fact that they have souls. So
yes.
Sentience, we'll talk about souls.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I think across sports, there's starting to be a bit of a reckoning when it comes to how we approach coaching people. And I feel like in the horse world it's happening a little bit more slowly than in the human sport world. But when you have top Olympic athletes who are coming out, who have been abused in the process of being coached to a high level, I think that there can easily be unhealthy cultures when it comes to sport. And it just so happens in equestrian sport that we have participants that didn't decide to do this. And so there is an ethical question there, and I think it's a reasonable ethical question. And so more so in our sport, not only for the health of the human athletes, but more importantly for the health of the horse non-human athletes, there needs to be the primary goal of the health and the long-term, I don't know if you want to say happiness, like the young ice skater that got the gold medal. I forget her name. Alyssa Liu. Quits the sport because of all of that pressure, and then comes back with her main goal being joy, and you can see it in her performance, and the performance is amazing to me to watch that. We kind of have to have that standard with the horses.
Can I just ask one quick question, Cecily? From your perspective, because very few people get to experience behind the scenes and live the life of someone at an elite level in equestrian sport. And from an outside perspective, it's not a true perspective. But do you see much joy in elite equestrian sport?
Boy.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
It's a hard... I want to say no. I want to say that mostly I see stressed out, burnt out riders and competitors who are doing everything they can and are feeling like they have to be willing to make whatever sacrifices they need to make in order to make it, is primarily what I see. There are some riders who are able to not be as affected by that type of pressure, but to me they're pretty few and far between. Our favorite basketball team is the Golden State Warriors, and they have a culture of joy. They compete their best when they are competing with the joy for the sport, but that's rare in sports. And I think because in the equestrian world we're not making millions of dollars like basketball players are, it's even more important, and we're walking an even finer line because our careers are on the line, and our ability to make money and support ourselves is on the line, and so the pressure behind it is it's intense.
I would have a similar but a little bit different of an answer. I think that I do definitely see joy and community, and so it's sort of a weird, almost like circus life that you live as a professional horse person. You're traveling all the time, you're in different places, and so you definitely start to get that sort of community, that sort of vagabond community, and so people have fun and enjoy themselves. I do definitely think for us, when we were in California, I would say the community was a bit more sort of tight-knit and about having fun. And then when we've been to Europe, I think that definitely those are the actual competitors' parties that you don't want to miss. But I think that the competitors, sure, everyone loses sight of why we're doing this, and it can feel like a grind sometimes, but I think that people, for the most part in the industry, have figured out how to cope and how to make the best out of it and sort of ride the wave. But I think if you ask if I see a lot of joy in the horses, I don't. When you're really looking at the horses at horse shows and the horses competing, I see a lot of coercion. I see a lot of horses that are just, honestly, it blows my mind because I'm like, how are they putting up with this? And I walk through the barn aisles, and when I watch warm up, I don't see the soul in those horses. I just feel like it's not there. Like the horses just feel so shut down to me, either shut down or overreactive. And I don't see those horses very often. Absolutely, there are some out there, and to me those are my favorite people to watch and be stabled with and all of that, because their horses have personalities and you can see that in every one of them. And then there's horses that never stick their heads out of the stall doors at horse shows and are very good soldiers, but they're just in there. They're sort of hunkered down, and that, I think, for me, is what's the hardest. think people are out there laughing and enjoying themselves and making jokes and making light in the warm-up rings, and I just see the horses with their chins in their chests, and they're never off the bit, and they're never on a long rein, and they're always on, and that, I think, is really what's missing from sport in general, in not just eventing, every sport, every horse sport.
And how can we bring that joy back, or how can we develop that joy? Is there...
I think that horse training has always been pretty brutal for the most part. And I think that over the decades, I think it has continued to get less and less so. I think that, and especially in the last decade, with the science and like the equitation science and the horsemanship kind of coming more and more mainstream, I think it's constantly changing. But I think the culture behind equestrianism, I mean, it's similar to just the culture in general. There is the strength and dominance, and anything less than that can come across as weakness. I think that's a pretty common thing that's not just in the horse world. So I do think that education is the biggest part of it, but I also think an openness to talk about everything that's involved in what we do, because I think just putting great pictures out there of us doing everything right and pictures of the horses looking perfect and beautiful, I think sets an unreasonable standard. And so I think being willing to talk about what the process looks like, and how much patience you actually need to have, and I think that there's just a lot of education that needs to happen. One thing that David said early on when he was our coach was that we learn how to ride before we learn about horses, and we learn how to compete before we learn how to ride. And so I think a lot of our education happens in a backwards way, and wanting to compete and getting into horses because you want to compete isn't necessarily a bad thing, but some of the first things that you need to learn, in my opinion, are missing.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think getting the joy back, at least for the horses, is about education, and it's crazy, especially in the US, because there's really no educational structure. It's crazy how many people don't know how horses' brains work. Like professionals that don't even know how their eyesight is different, what they can and can't see. And I just, and myself being guilty of that ignorance up until a few years ago. But I mean, that blows my mind. Here we are competing these horses, making competition rules for horses, and I would say probably the majority of professional riders, trainers in the industry do not have a basic level of understanding of how horses process information, how they see how their bodies work. And so I think in order to bring better care, better training, better standards, better rules to the industry, we have to make sure that that's built upon at least a very basic understanding of how horses actually work. Not how we used to think they work, not how we think we would work if we were a horse. The amount of people that go, oh, well, my horse only has to work an hour a day, so if that were my life, I would be so happy. Like, they can just give me everything they have in that hour, because what a cush life. It's like, well, okay, you're a human. That is not how a horse sees what you're doing with them in any way, shape, or form. So to have an expectation that the hour that the human has chosen for the horse to come out and work, for them to be absolutely compliant, is bonkers, and needs to get out of the general larger conversation. It needs to be gone from how we speak about horses. It has no place. And so I think that's where it's about education. And I think that the federations and the organizations involved with the sports need to figure out how to make sure that everybody competing a horse, everybody training a horse, has that basic understanding, has that basic knowledge.
So you talk about that in your letter, and talk about mandatory certification and recertification of professionals. So can you describe what you think that education should actually include, and who should be designing it?
I think that any discussion about the future of the sport needs to involve vets, behavioral therapists, and human psychologists. I think everybody needs to be brought in to help us determine those things, because most of our training curriculums have just come from trainers, and there are a lot of things that I was taught when I was young that have been disproved as good training methods. And if we're only basing our rules and our education based on how we were trained, then the sport isn't going to progress how it needs to.
What I loved about your letter, not only did you highlight all these issues, and then you were very open and honest and came at it with an insider's perspective, which I think is why it resonated with people so much, but you also proposed solutions. It wasn't just a rant. It wasn't just, these are all the things that are wrong. You actually proposed solutions, and the education certification thing was one of them. Another was touched on the whole issue of whistleblowers and protection for whistleblowers, and I suppose that was sparked by instances that had happened where people had come forward and maybe weren't as protected as they should have been or could have been. Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk about that a little bit more, expand on what you were thinking there?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a tough one, especially with social media, but somehow we need to figure out how to make it so that people feel more comfortable coming forward. And one of my ideas was something like a grooms union, something where people that are in the nitty-gritty of taking care of the horses, watching horses being ridden, warmed up, competed, if there's a grooms union saying this is what's okay, this is what's not okay, that right away creates better circumstances for the horses. If there's something a little bit more official that's out there, so that people feel that they can speak up and at least work through the things that they're seeing, and then have support if it's something that they feel like they need to speak more about. I think that now too, the prevalence of things like NDAs in professional barns, like that seems crazy to me.
The way that I kind of imagine it is, if there was something like an ombudsman office that's separate from the national governing body, but kind of works underneath the umbrella of the national governing body, but is a specific office who is there to support in human sports. It would be to support the humans, but in this case it would be to support the human athletes and to support the horse athletes, so that people have a place to go that is not your national governing body, but a group whose sole purpose is to help you negotiate any legal process. If you're wanting to make a complaint.
Yeah, because it becomes quite a legalistic process too, doesn't it? Once that initial complaint has been made. One of the things I wanted to ask was, you frame this as we're at a bit of an inflection point. So, are you optimistic that the sport will choose? I think you might have called it a soft path, or do you think it's going to take something dramatic like, losing the Olympic status or something similar to force change, I guess?
I like to think that I'm an optimist, but I do think that, changing culture is not a fast thing, and I think especially in the equestrian disciplines where tradition is really important. I do think the tradition of horse training and horse sports is an important thing to have an understanding of and to respect. But I think if horse sports are going to not only stay in the Olympic Games but stay relevant at all, I think we're going to have to change faster, because like with American flat racing and the problems that they've had, it only takes a few abuse cases and a few bad videos out there to really kind of shut an entire industry down. And I think a little bit like Cecily said, I think that if we can't figure out ways of addressing horse and human welfare within the equestrian world, then we really don't deserve to have the sport. I think we truly believe that, and I love eventing, and boy, I live for it, but I live for the horses more, and I think it's a difficult line to walk, but I think that we have to be open to talking about it. And I think that within the industry there's a little bit of this view of we have to be putting our best foot forward, and we need to be talking about and showing the public everything good. And so then it really puts the pressure on not talking about a lot of these things, especially not talking about them in a public way. And I don't think that is going to create change at all. I think that's really trying to pull the curtain, and I don't think it's showing, I don't think it's being honest about what the industry is and how the industry needs to change.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. I think that it is about welcoming that conversation, encouraging that conversation, instead of trying to stifle that conversation. And it can feel like if we start having that conversation and open ourselves up to it, that then the sport is going to have to bow to the most extreme views, and that we won't even be able to ride horses anymore because you have people saying you shouldn't even ride horses. I think the fear is that if we start having the conversation, if we start letting other voices in, that we're going to lose everything completely. Horses are going to have to live on the prairie with no shoes and never be, forced to do anything. But I think the opposite is true, that if we don't have this conversation, we're going to lose the sport, because it's a bad look to be defending a lot of the things that are going on and saying, well, that's just how it is. And I think that a lot of the changes that have been made specifically to 3-day eventing in order to stay in the Olympics have been good for the horse or the sport. So it's a little bit of a push and pull there, because I think if the sport gets pulled from the Olympics, I think that would be very bad for the sport, and that it would potentially create worse circumstances for the horses, because then you'd have less motivation to have things look good. It would go back to being a little bit more private, a little bit less in the public eye. I think ultimately it's as much as I cannot endorse social media, I think it is going to come down to social media and the visibility of the bad things that can happen, not just in competitions, in barns. The more that gets out there, the more lay people are going to see what happens and go, that doesn't look nice, and the less are arguments of, well, that's just how it's always been done and you don't understand, these horses are dangerous and you don't get to have animals in the circus anymore with like pokers, and elephants seem scary. I wouldn't know what to do with an elephant, and if you told me the only way to control them was with a sharp instrument, I would believe you. So I think that as the sport gets more visibility in ways that we don't necessarily want it to, we're going to have a reckoning. And so I think that we should get in front of that conversation and have that reckoning for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think in what you did with your letter, and I scrolled down through the comments and they were overwhelmingly positive. There weren't that many certainly publicly posted negative comments. I think what you've done is given people a kind of a voice. You've shown people that there is a positive that can be done because of your standing, because you're at the peak of your professions. I think that's really, really powerful. So I don't think we should say social media and exposure is bad. It's just how we harness it and how we use it. And I suppose that leads on to a question: is there a bigger strategy? Have Cecily and Matt got a strategy for the next stage, the next steps in this journey? What are you going to tell us? What are you going to post? What are you going to do? Because you are leading not a charge, but you're leading a movement. What happens next?
Yeah, I don't think that we're thinking about it in that way, really. I think that what we're doing is trying to be very open and honest about our journey, and because I think our personal journey does kind of line up with what's happening in equestrian sport in general right now. And I think what we are learning, and what I'm learning specifically, is that the more open I've been to talking about my struggles, either mental health struggles or the mistakes that I've made with horses, it has only had a positive impact for us. And so I think that trying to really just continue that process of being open about how we are negotiating these issues, by being honest and not being afraid to put the good, the bad, and the ugly out there. Hopefully people will, take that to heart and realize that it's okay to talk about those things, and that it's actually in talking about those things that we can connect with each other, because that's the real world. It's things that we're all having to deal with within the sport. And so I think that that's how we can try to lead the conversation, is by continuing to be open about that process, and hope that same conversation can be happening more sport-wide.
We don't have, the power to change rules single-handedly, or just like wave a magic wand and make it so that everybody knows more about horses. But yeah, what we can do is just continue to put our thoughts out there, and to be honest and own the fact that we may not be right about everything.
We have made a commitment to ourselves that if we aren't able to be honest and approach horses and approach the sport the way that we feel like is ethical, then we're not going to do it. And
Yeah.
we've come to that place within our careers multiple times where we've had to look at each other and be like, I have done martial arts, and I would say to Cecily, I have a martial arts studio picked out. I can just transition to doing that. And Cecily has a food truck that she wants to, and so it's like we have had to come to this place multiple times in our careers. If we don't feel like we can stand up for the things that are important to us, then we shouldn't be doing this. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing, and I think that's why we've been willing to take the risk to talk about some of these things, because if we can't, then we shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, and with social media, we, have the fortune of having somewhat of a platform, and so we put our thoughts out there, and people can read them and respond to them, or they can scroll past, and we're just hoping that we resonate with some people and we can put something positive out into the world in terms of how we think that horses can be treated. There's a lot of things that Matt and I talk about on a daily basis about just simple things like how normalized it is to call a horse an asshole. Oh, he's just being an asshole right now, right? And if we can just put little things out like, hey guys, let's maybe not call our horses assholes, because it's that language that others the horse and it takes away their soul. And so I think that if we can just keep putting ideas like that out there, that message out there, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be packaged perfectly all the time. I think we're definitely going to say things in a way that's we wish we could take back. But I think, yeah, like Matt said, it's embracing that we're imperfect with the horses, we're imperfect with our messaging, we're imperfect with our ideas, but let's just keep engaging and trying to do better and hope that that sends us in the right direction.
Yeah. That sounds like such a great message, because none of us are perfect, and even the people working in the traditional ways, they're not perfect. None of us are perfect, and I'd really love to finish on something really quite positive, because I think really that's where you guys are at. You're trying to create something positive out of all of this conversation, and I want to pick up on something you mentioned before about people fearing that they're going to lose the sport, and that's what I notice, and I'm sure Mita notices it as well, is that there's this knee-jerk reaction that change equals loss, and if we go start this journey of change, we're going to lose everything. In your letter you spoke about, and I'm going to quote here, the personal and spiritual benefit of knowing that I'm trying every single day to be better for my horses than I was the day before. Can you tell us about some of those benefits? Because I think people fear the change. Maybe if we can share some of the benefits that might help, embolden people to perhaps try some new things.
I think that it just comes down to like why we got into this in the beginning, and I got into horses because I was a little kid and I loved horses and I loved being with horses, and I'm actually listening to a book right now, and one of the quotes that he talked about was that success doesn't equal happiness, happiness brings success. And so I think everybody came to horses from that place of loving the animals, and so being able to on a daily basis enjoy the horses, it just makes their lives better, it makes our lives better. If I'm doing this for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, I want to be happy while I'm doing it, and and I can do that by approaching the horses in a way that makes me happy. And I think that has to be the key to finding success, and not think that by winning gold medals or by staying in the Olympics, that's going to create the success that we want. It's the opposite of that. It's starting from a place of being able to be happy, have the horses be happy. That's what's going to bring the success that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think acknowledging and accepting the fact that it is much easier to try to address a problem with a horse in the quick way that we learned in the past. Yeah, if I have a mouthy horse, at least in the short term, if I, bonk them in the face, they're probably going to stop coming at me, right? But now they're shying away from me. And so acknowledging that, taking the extra time to really observe and try to understand what's going on for the horse on a deeper level is not the easy way to do it. And it's not instant gratification. It feels like failure for a lot of the time, right? Because you're not stopping that behavior immediately, or you're not getting an instant result. And so I hope that acknowledging that it's a slower process, and it can feel really hard, and it can feel like failure, but allowing the horse to be a horse and observing them and really trying to listen to what they are telling you is so gratifying. And really starting to understand your horse and feel like they're working with you and not just for you is like, that feeds the soul. But acknowledging the hard part of that too, and the patience that it takes, and spreading that out there into the world of like, look, it isn't easy. It's way easier to whack a horse to get him to go over a ditch than take 2 weeks to let him just walk past it and see it and get comfortable with it. But that feels so much better. So a little bit, it's sort of acknowledging the bad with the good, and taking the bad, what feels like failure, what feels like frustration, what feels like just griping about the sport and all the things that are bad with it, and turning that into something good, something positive. I think, if that makes sense at all.
Absolutely. I must say I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We don't know each other. We just came together this evening, different times, that afternoon, tomorrow morning with you, Karen, to chat about something that's obviously very dear to us all, very close to all our hearts. And I felt a real sense of connection and a real authenticity, Cecily and Matt, with everything you said. I really commend your honesty and your bravery. I think it's been just a pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you. It's really been an honor to be a part of your podcast, and we appreciate what you guys are doing for horses and the sport in general. And I hope that conversations like this can keep going and continue to get out to a broader community.
Yeah, I think the idea of creating that community, and it's people like you that help to do that, because it's creating a platform, a community, a place where people can hear different ideas, and start to figure out what, not just learning, education, but start to figure out what feels true for them. And so just the more voices that are putting that out there, I think the more likely it is that more people will identify with that. Yep. So thank you.
Oh, our pleasure, and thank you for sharing all of your ideas and writing that wonderful letter. Changing Rain is brought to you by me, Karen Luke, and my co-host, Mita Osborne. If you enjoyed the show and would like to support us, please subscribe and leave us a review. It helps others find us and helps us keep the show going. You can watch this whole episode on YouTube at youtube.com/@changingrain. We love your suggestions, feedback, and questions, so please drop us a line. You can email us at team@changingrain.com. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.